Hello, today we are going to look at our Earth Science number 2 Cornell Notes. So to do that, I go into my Schoology account. I'll open the textbook PDF. Once the PDF is open, I'm going to also need my Cornell Notes file open. So I'm back in my, here it is where it says number 2. Click that. Okay, then I go over here and I open it. If I get a screen that says private access, just go back and try it again. It needs to do that for some reason. Okay, so number 2 Cornell Notes, it looks like that we may have already done this. Okay, so let's check it out. Okay, I've decided I will continue on this, and if there's time within the video to finish, I'm going to go to the top and rename it with my name. You would need to put your name, just a reminder. You also put the period. And now it looks like I am on number 4, and I'm using the section heading as a question. Here are the pages. Go to your PDF textbook, to those pages. So just a reminder, it's the weathering chapter, which we're just continuing into weathering. Here's mechanical and chemical weathering, where rock breaks apart or it combines with water or maybe oxygen for rust. That's called chemical weathering. And when you have red soil, that's where there has been oxidation taking place. Hard rock can be there's things called minerals that make up the rock, very small, but you can see with your eye. As time goes by, the stuff that glues them or cements them together will be dissolved, and then the rock will get softer and softer. It's called sediment. Acid rain causes this kind of damage like you see on this lion. Okay, now we're on section 2, rates of weathering, which we have started. Differential weathering, and they're talking about surface area. Let's see where we are on our Cornell note paper. It looks like I did rock composition affects how fast it weathers. How does the amount of exposure affect how fast rocks weathers? Let's go back and see where we're at. Looks like the last heading we did was amount of exposure, so we are on surface area. Remember, blue or green headings. Now I typed a question, what's surface area and what's it have to do with weathering? Now that I'm doing Cornell Notes, I'm realizing that the questions need to be more helpful, not just to finish the assignment. So now I'm like, oh, okay, so I can answer the questions with some bullets. I'll do that. Okay, so I read the paragraph and I wrote 2 notes about it. Now I'm ready to go to my next heading. Let's go back to our PDF. Remember, keep both of these open. Fractures and joints will be the next heading, so I will type that. Okay, so I wrote the question, what are fractures and joints and how do they affect weathering, so that I can try to figure out, so that I can learn this. So now I'll go back to my PDF, keep going. Okay, so fractures and joints, think of them kind of like cracks. Natural zones of weakness in rocks, and water can get in there, and when that happens, ice can form, which, as you remember from last week, that's where ice will wedge the rock apart. Okay, now I'm ready for my next heading. So I read this, that's where I got my answers from, and here they're showing a little bit about some erosion. Okay, the next one is climate. Okay, so let's do that one. So climate is, you'll need to read this, take a few minutes, it's interesting. And it's talking about a thing called an obelisk. That's what this is, an Egyptian obelisk. So I've written my climate heading. I put, what does climate have to do with weathering? Remember, where it's hot and dry, there's less chemical weathering, and water doesn't get in cracks because there isn't any water, very little. So climate does affect how fast it weathers. So if you're in the desert, that's where you can store things that won't dissolve, erode, etc., versus wet or cold climates. Okay, so take a minute and read this part right here. Okay, so you took a few minutes to read this, and if you think about it a little bit, they're talking about it's slow in very cold climates. Very cold climates, because there isn't a lot of water that thaws, ice thawing and freezing, and so there isn't a lot of rain, like Antarctica, Alaska, places that are super cold is what they're talking about. In Russia and China, they have some really cold areas there. Okay, so I read that, and that's where I got my bullets. So I'll go to the next heading. Just a reminder, when you read this, you'll also get about, I talked about deserts. It's a lot slower than like the jungle or New York. Okay, so topography is how you say this word, topography. That's like what the land looks like. Is it hilly? Is it flat? Like if you go to the Great Plains, it's completely flat there versus like the Rocky Mountains. Okay, so that's what this is. We'll write that down. Okay, so I read this little thing about it's topography, and they're talking about when you have a very steep mountain like the Alps. This, you're not going to have dirt on bare rock, but if you have a mountain that's not quite as steep, maybe like Big Bear, you will have dirt and rocks, and if there's a rainstorm, all that stuff is just going to be washed away or washed down, and that exposes more to the elements, to wind and air. So that's actually what I wrote. And then I put topography, what it is, and then about on steeper slopes, think about dirt going downhill, which means there's more exposure. You've probably seen this, like you'll see after a rainstorm we had a couple weeks ago, there was a lot of areas where there was like little channels or rivulets, where their dirt was washed away. Okay, so the next heading. So it looks like the human activities, and then the last one would be plant and animal activities. They're showing you this guy in a four-wheeler. These are a lot of fun. They're also very destructive. Look at those tires. I mean, they're going to smash everything in their way, and so let's write a little bit about that. They're fun to do, but it's important to be responsible at the same time. So I'll go back to human activities. So how do human activities affect weathering? And then I'm reading a little bit in the book. It's talking about mining and construction, exposed rock. And the reason that it causes faster erosion or weathering is because it's not exposed just by wind or air. It's exposed because of what people are doing there. Okay, so let's write that down. Okay, so perhaps you've been down at the beach or the dunes or somewhere, and you see signs that say, oh, this is closed for reclaiming, because there's been a lot of people walking through there, and the plants get broken down and things get trampled, so you might see a boardwalk where you're supposed to walk instead, and that's because they're trying to preserve the original plant life, and plant life means what? Oh, animal life. So it's very important to conserve and pay attention to what you're doing. We're not throwing water bottles around. I see over by the school where I live, people are just playing soccer over there right now, which is great, but they're leaving their trash behind. And who wants to look at a bunch of trash? So, okay, next heading. I think we're on our last one. Yes, plant and animal activities. So that's going to have to do with digging. Even though this is natural, it doesn't mean that we're studying weathering and what causes that. So let's read a little bit about this. Take just a few minutes and read this and write some notes, and I'll do that. So here's a little bit about bat guano, which of course is only going to be like in caves and areas. However, it's worth mentioning. It's kind of interesting, and it will help you remember. Roots break rock apart, such as you studied this earlier last week. We talked about that. And here, bat guano and insects increase weathering. So that is our last heading. Now I'll go to my summary of the note. Remember 4 or more complete sentences that summarize, and also remember to punctuate. So take a minute to do that. Okay, so I finished the Cornell Notes for number 2, and I'm done with the PDF for the Earth Science textbook. I'll go back, and I'm just looking it over real quick. Oh, here I forgot to capitalize. So I'll fix that. And I've got, these are complete sentences, so I'm just looking it over. If I understand it and feel like it, I can take out these extra spaces just to pretty it up a little bit. To do that, you highlight it. Go to Format Table, delete the row that I've highlighted. Perhaps I'd want to do that here, so I click on it. I go to Format, down to Table, and I'll there it is, delete row, and I'll try a backspace. It won't let me take this out without messing around a lot, which I am not going to do. I've also added today's date. These are complete. I'm just looking it over to make sure everything's done, and it looks like A work. This would be A work. Everything goes with the rubric. And then you're going to have your name up here and the period. You'll either share it with me in Schoology, you'll hit submit. Good work, and looking forward to getting your submissions.